People who did not believe in ghosts, what real-life paranormal experience changed your mind? Story 1. There were two houses on one property. When I was about 8 or 10 years old in the early 1980s, my family moved into one of them at the request of the property owner, who lived about 8 hours away. We were basically there to keep an eye on the place. Almost immediately, strange things started happening. My parents, my siblings, and I began to see an apparition on the back porch of the other house. It was the unmistakable outline of a woman, blue in color, wearing a large dress and holding an open umbrella over her head. You couldn't make out a face or details, just the eerie, glowing shape. It wasn't there all the time, but it appeared at various times every single day. And it wasn't just our family who saw it. Any visitor we had could see her too. Some of my dad's friends would actually come over and stand out in the yard with him, just staring at the porch in disbelief. We lived on that property for 2 years, and I could write a book about everything we saw. We had a key to the other house, and my mom would cross the yard to use the phone in its kitchen to call my dad on his lunch break. She never went alone, she always made me come with her. The key was for the back door, which you reached by walking across the back porch, the same porch where the blue woman stood. If she was visible, Dad didn't get his phone call. Inside, the air felt wrong. As soon as you stepped through the door, it was like wading into water up to your neck, heavy, thick, pressing down on you. I'll never forget one particular day. My mom was sitting in the kitchen on the phone, and I was at the table, scared out of my mind. A dish drainer sat by the sink with some silverware and a couple of plates. Suddenly, it started to rattle, hard like someone was shaking it. We bolted out of there without a second thought. Another time we were in the kitchen and heard one of the interior doors start slamming over and over, like someone was trapped and trying to get out. That was another quick exit for us. In one of the bedrooms, there was an old dresser with big metal loops on each drawer. One day, those loops started shaking violently on their own, rattling so loud we could hear it from the kitchen. And once, I went to grab a glass from the counter to get some water from the sink. Before I could touch it, the glass slid away from my hand right down the counter by itself and crashed into the sink, shattering. Another time, I had to use the restroom while my mother was on the phone. I walked down the hallway, and as I did, I started to hear voices, 2 men and a woman talking softly but clearly. The closer I got to the bathroom, the louder it became, like I was walking toward a conversation happening behind a curtain. When I opened the door and flipped on the light, I saw something I can still picture as vividly now as I did then, almost 40 years later. In the huge clawfoot tub stood a woman in a big dress like something from the 1920s, holding an open umbrella over her head. On either side of her stood 2 men in white overalls with thin blue stripes and matching caps. They immediately stopped talking and turned to look at me, all 3 of them wearing the same expression, anger. I screamed, bolted back up the hall, past my mom, out of the kitchen, and straight off the back porch. My mom was right behind me, not even knowing why I was running, but assuming the situation dictated evacuation. One time I was heading to the bathroom, and as usual, my mom wouldn't let me leave her alone in the kitchen. I made it to the head of the hallway when, out of nowhere, every single door in that hallway slammed shut at once, like a shotgun blast of wood and hinges. I decided right then and there that holding my pee was the smarter option. Another winter, my parents brought a heavy blanket over from the other house. The owner had told us we could borrow anything from over there, so we didn't think twice. That same day, things in our house started up. The TV, one of those old console sets with the big click-clack knobs, would just turn itself on. You'd hear a little pop, and suddenly it was blaring. It didn't matter if it was 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. All of us might be in the living room watching MASH after the 9 o'clock news, when, clear as day, the toilet in the bathroom would flush by itself. Little things like that started to feel normal. One night, my dad leaned over the bed to pick up a book my mom had been reading. It was lying open face down in the middle of the mattress. As soon as his hand got close, the book jumped about a foot away, just like the glass incident I'd had before. He put a knee on the bed to stretch farther, and the book jumped again, this time off the bed entirely. By now, he was lying across the mattress, reaching down to the floor, and finally managed to grab it. He stood up, walked straight to the back door, and flung the book out into the yard. My dad used to bring friends from work over and take them through the other house just to see which area would make the hair on their arms stand up the most. We lived there for 2 years, and strange things happened almost daily. One day, my dad found an old photo album. We were all sitting in the kitchen flipping through it when, about halfway in, I came across a picture that made my blood freeze. It showed the same 3 people I had seen in the bathroom, the woman with the umbrella and the 2 men standing in the town's rail yard, probably in the early 1900s. Later, I learned that the woman had been married to one of the train engineers pictured beside her. The other man was his friend, also a train engineer. The house we were in had been the home of the husband and wife. That day, as I walked down the hallway toward the bathroom, I could actually hear them talking. Their voices were clear, 2 men and the woman. One of the men wanted to leave, but the other man and the woman were adamant about staying. Then I opened the bathroom door and stepped inside, interrupting their conversation. Shortly after we found the photo album, we moved. I suppose my father had simply had enough of his family being terrified. Being woken in the middle of the night by blankets being yanked off, doors slamming, lights flickering on and off, the TV turning on by itself, or waking to apparitions standing at the side or foot of the bed, or even just blobs of dark mist floating around the room, had taken its toll. Several years later, I joined the military and left the state. After 20 years away, I moved back with my wife and kids. I started a delivery company, and one day I had a job on the very same road as that old house. The emotions that surged through me as I drove by were intense. I expected to see it crumbling, overtaken by woods and brush, as it's very rural. To my surprise, though, people were living there. I made my delivery, and on the way back, I pulled into the yard, the same yard where almost 40 years earlier, I had played under the watchful eye of the Blue Lady. A woman about my age and a younger woman who looked to be in her mid-20s stepped outside to see what I wanted. I made up a quick story about being from the area, moving away, then coming back, and wanting to write a book about the region's history. I mentioned that I had lived on the property as a child and asked if they'd ever had any experiences in the house. The older woman looked surprised. The younger woman looked scared. They admitted that in their 4 or 5 years of living there, they'd experienced some puzzling things. Pictures removed from walls, doors slamming, little oddities like that, but said it had been a while since anything had happened. I learned that the original family finally sold the property after all of the elderly members had passed away. The first buyer barely closed on it and moved in before quickly deciding she no longer found it appealing. She moved out as fast as she could. The people I had been talking to were the ones who eventually bought it. No, they didn't believe in ghosts. No, they couldn't explain how family pictures would end up on the living room wall at night and on the kitchen floor in the morning. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I have a few experiences to share, but first, some background. As a child, I never believed in ghosts and hardly ever thought about them. My mom, however, moved into an old house, built between 1900 and 1905, when I was in 2nd grade. She gave my sister and me the attic as our room. It was amazing having the entire space to ourselves. The stairs up there were tricky to navigate as an adult. The roof came to a point, so you had to bend down and sometimes climb on your hands and knees, depending on your height. The stairs were at the far end of the room along the right-hand wall, and to their left was my sister's bed. My bed was along the left wall, directly across from hers. At the other end of the room was a fireplace that divided the attic slightly and left an empty square space we hardly ever went into. I know it might seem like a small detail, but with all the stories, it's important to understand how the room was laid out. 1. This was when my twin sister and I were in 2nd grade, so we were probably about 7 or 8 years old at the time. My sister Lindsay and I had a cute little routine. We would turn off the lights, crawl into bed, and refuse to sleep until we both said "good night, love you" to each other. That night, I turned off the light by the stairs, felt my way back to my bed, and tucked myself in. I was the first to say, "Good night, Lindsay, love you," and she replied, "Good night, Jessica, love you too." It was pitch black. We couldn't see anything. I closed my eyes to try to sleep, and she did the same. After about 10 minutes of silence, hard to tell exactly when you're trying to fall asleep, I suddenly heard from the direction of the stairs, "Good night, Lindsay," in an unmistakably adult woman's voice. I froze. Our mom was working at the bar, no one else lived with us, and no one was watching us, and Lindsay wouldn't say goodnight to herself. Thinking she might be pulling a prank on me, I was about to ask if it was her when I distinctly heard her from her bed say, "Jess, was that you?" It obviously wasn't. But me, being the little dumbhead I was, said, "Yeah," so I wouldn't scare her. Ugh. She slept fine that night, but I was wide awake. I didn't tell her about it until almost 2 years later, when we were 16. 2. My mom moved out of that house for a year to live in Missouri, but she eventually moved back. This time we slept on the 2nd floor instead of in the attic, and my mom stayed on the 1st floor. By then, I hadn't thought about the house being haunted in a long time. I figured I'd just been tired, silly, and little, and had imagined it all. One night, I tried to go to bed early, around 10, and had just lain down when I heard 3 voices outside my door. They were all women, one sounding older and the other 2 like adults, and I could hear clinking noises like dishes bumping together. My mom had gone to bed at 8. We always teased her for going to sleep so early. I knew she was downstairs, and Lindsay was at our dad's house, so it couldn't have been either of them. Besides, the kitchen was downstairs, so the sound of dishes didn't make any sense. The voices were very clear right outside my door, but what they were saying sounded like a completely different language. I couldn't understand a word of it. I wasn't even spooked. I was mostly annoyed, so I said casually, "Stop, I'm trying to sleep. Instantly, it went quiet, and I ended up sleeping great that night. 3. I brought a friend over to stay the night not long after that second incident. He had left his phone and his DS on the bathroom vanity to charge his phone sitting on top of the DS, which was off and plugged in. We were in my room and he was getting tired, so he got up to grab his phone and bring it in to charge. A moment later, I heard him say, "Oh my gosh." I called what? But got no response. Annoyed, I went out to see what was going on. He was standing in the hall, hands over his mouth, staring into the bathroom. I peeked in. His phone was still sitting exactly where he'd left it on the vanity, but the DS was now unplugged, on the floor, facing us, flipped open and sitting on the opening screen for Pokemon. I paused for a second and started laughing. Hey, maybe they just wanted to play Pokemon. But when I looked at my friend to make a joke, I saw tears streaming down his face. "Oh my gosh, are you crying?" I asked. After that night, he never liked sleeping over again. 4. This was about 6 months ago. My sister had moved back in with my mom and taken the attic, the original setting of our hauntings. She put her bed in that empty little square room and set up a futon and TV where our old beds used to be. When I came to sleep over one night, instead of taking my old room, we stayed up late watching movies together, and I decided to sleep on the futon. She told me she'd been hearing footsteps pacing back and forth behind the futon ever since she moved in. I joked that it was probably the same woman who'd said goodnight to her when we were little. We call her the woman who walks because we think it's funny to make it sound scary. That night, Lindsay went to bed around midnight, while I stayed up a bit longer and finally shut off my phone at 2. I felt a kind of paranoia I'd never experienced before. It was unsettling, so I shone my flashlight around, feeling like I was being watched. But there was nothing there. I set the flashlight down, and the room went completely dark, so dark I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I even tested it, thinking, wow, it's super dark. Let's see if I can see my hand. I was struggling to fall asleep. After about half an hour, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth, just to my right. What the heck, I thought. Frozen. Then something brushed my hair lightly on the right side of my head. Now I was properly freaking out, lying completely stiff. After about 2 minutes, it stopped. I tried to calm myself down, convincing myself it was nothing, that there had to be an explanation, and I'd figure it out in the morning. But then, from the direction of the fireplace, I heard footsteps again, this time coming toward me. Oh God, I thought. I hope it's Lindsay getting up to go to the bathroom. But no, the footsteps kept coming, and they didn't turn toward the stairs. I heard the creak of a floorboard right where my feet were at the end of the futon and felt a presence standing there. It didn't move. My toes were practically brushing against it. It stayed until I was so fed up I didn't care anymore and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I heard Lindsay actually get up from her bed to go to the bathroom. Wow, I thought, I must have really been out of it last night to imagine all that. But as she walked past the futon, she stepped on the same floorboard, and it made the exact same creak, and I felt that same sensation at my feet as she passed. She hadn't gotten up in the middle of the night, and that time, I was genuinely freaked out. It was the first time anything in that house had ever made me feel truly intimidated. 5. The last story is from about 4 months ago. It isn't mine, but Lindsay's. She's had plenty more experiences since she lives there, but this one was the worst. We were FaceTiming one night, talking about the woman who walks. Lindsay suffers from insomnia, so she's always awake and can usually hear the footsteps, but for the past 3 nights, she told me she hadn't heard a single sound, something she thought was really strange. We made the mistake of joking about the woman who walks. I said she must have taken a vacation. Walking around all night is a tough job. Lindsay laughed and said she was probably pacing behind a couch in the Bahamas. It was funny to us at the time. When it got late, we said good night, love you, and hung up. I had school the next day, so I went to sleep pretty early. The next morning, around 10, I was in art class when my phone rang. Lindsay was trying to FaceTime me. That class was very laid back, so I popped in my headphones and answered, only to be immediately greeted by Lindsay, crying and laughing a little in disbelief. Before I could even ask what was going on, she jumped straight into the story, saying she was on her way to buy sage and finally deal with this nonsense. She was actually able to sleep pretty well that night and went to bed soon after we hung up. Lindsay can usually wake herself up from nightmares easily, so when she started having one that night, she forced herself awake. Nothing new for her. She woke up in her bed, opened her eyes, and it was around 3 a.m. She couldn't move. Fine, she thought. Sleep paralysis. Not that weird. But Lindsay had never had it before. She recognized it quickly, though, and looked around. By the fireplace, she saw a man standing in the dark. She couldn't remember exactly which actor she'd once compared him to, but she said he looked completely sunken, like he was rotting, like a zombie or something, and he was just standing there staring at her. Then, in an instant, he ran up to her, until he was almost nose to nose, screaming in her face at the top of his lungs, not saying anything, just screaming. She said she could smell his breath and feel the spit hitting her face. She had no idea how long it went on, probably 10 minutes, she guessed, though it felt like an hour. Then his hand reached up, about to grab her head, face, neck. She wasn't sure which. Instinctively, she raised her own hand and grabbed his wrist. She said she could feel his skin, and because he seemed so rotten, she could feel his bones and muscles beneath it. Then, suddenly, it all stopped. She lay there thinking she must be going crazy. She didn't call me until she knew I'd be awake because she didn't want me to be tired for school. So anyway, my sister stayed in the house after that. I haven't heard much from her since. If you've read all of this, thank you. I think these are interesting, even fun experiences to share with my friends, though they've gotten a little darker over time. Lesson learned: don't make fun of your ghosts if you want them to stay friendly. Story 3. I grew up in a haunted house. For basically my whole life, weird things happened there. When I was little, it scared the heck out of me, but over time, I just got desensitized to it. We'd hear footsteps when no one was upstairs, voices when everyone was downstairs, and even watch the dogs track something invisible as it moved around the room. All the classic ghost stuff. Some of the stranger experiences stand out even now. My grandma once saw her own mother standing in her room at night. My mom once saw a ball of light floating in our hallway. My brother and I, at completely different times, both heard fingernails tapping on the walls of our bedrooms. When we called our mom in to listen, the sounds would stop. The moment she left, they'd start again. Neither of us knew the other was having the same experience until much later. I also had a little desk toy in my room, a foam ball hanging from a chain. One afternoon, my cousin and I were playing video games when, out of nowhere, the ball bounced as if someone had tapped it from below. The real kicker was when my mom started feeling like something was climbing into bed with her at night. She described it like a dog trying and failing to climb up on the foot of the bed. At first, she thought it was just my dad moving his feet, but then she felt it on nights when he wasn't there, and she was wide awake. That's when she knew it wasn't him. She kept this story to herself, until a few days later my uncle stayed overnight in the guest room and, without knowing anything, described feeling the exact same thing. At that point, my mom waited for a day when everyone was out of the house. She opened all the windows and out loud told the spirit that it either had to leave and move on or it wasn't allowed to bother us anymore. Since then, we've gone from daily activity to just the occasional, one-off experience every few months. Guests who've stayed in the spare room often report nightmares about it. A few have even said they felt a strange energy in the closet. Some swear there's a portal there. Sometimes I think spirits just pass through and cause a flurry of activity before moving on. I've got more stories if anyone wants to hear them. Edit. More stories. A couple of disclaimers first. When it comes to my family's general makeup, we aren't some wild hippies seeing things that aren't there. There's no drug use, no alcohol abuse. My father owns his own business, and my mother handles the finances for it. My brother is a civil engineer who graduated from a highly reputable school with honors. I'm a musician now, but before that I attended a couple of well-known colleges and made straight A's, even in courses like second-level anatomy. We believe in science and logic, and we have no explanation for these experiences. In my life, the general consensus has always been that ghosts are real, and people who think they aren't are like those wusses who think evolution is made up. I'm a religious person, and my belief in the paranormal has only strengthened my faith. In the end, though, all that stuff doesn't really matter. For all you know, I could be pulling your leg, or I could just be completely crazy. What I will say is this: as far as I know, every story I post here is true. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. Buckle up, folks, I've got a lot to tell. Not all of these stories are mine, and not all of them happened in my house, but every one of them has been told to me by people I trust, people of sound mind with no reason to lie. I don't automatically believe most stories I hear, and I treat every experience as a chance to try to prove that something isn't haunted. I ghost hunt fairly often, and I go into every building assuming it isn't haunted. I run my investigations by the motto, if there's any doubt, you throw it out. Meaning that if there's any possible way to disprove an experience, we assume it was the normal factor, not a ghost. We try to do this as scientifically as possible. I'll start with the portal in the closet. I've never experienced that myself, and I've slept like a baby in that room a few times. I've never had anything weird happen there, so I can't really say much about that one. For a while, I lived in a dorm that was rumored to be haunted. The only notable thing I ever experienced there, other than just spooky feelings, was one night when I came out of my room to go to the bathroom. As I rounded the corner, a shadow about 4 feet high came out of the room and vanished right before it would have passed through me. I was about 18 at the time, and despite living in a haunted house my whole life, it was my first time actually seeing something with my own eyes. I wasn't scared so much as surprised, which honestly defines most of my paranormal experiences. My father owns two branches of a business, and one of them is in a building that's over 100 years old. Ever since we took over the place, employees have told us stories about strange things happening there. Everything from products flying off shelves to shadows showing up where there shouldn't be any. One driver in particular had a chilling experience. He was in the back of the store when he saw a shadow shaped like a person standing at the top of a set of steps. He backed into the front room, pale as a sheet, and told my dad what had happened. He never went back into that room again and quit not long after because of how scared he was. In that same building, my dad and I were there one Memorial Day a few years back, changing out lights while the store was closed. We were absolutely sure we were the only people there. My dad was up on a scissor lift, about 15 feet in the air, swapping out bulbs, and I was running back and forth to the breaker box in one of the back rooms so he wouldn't get electrocuted. There were 3 shelves along the path I kept passing, 2 very tall ones with a shorter 4-foot shelf between them. On one trip out of the back room, I saw a man standing on the far side of the shorter shelf, just looking at me. He wore a hat and had a mustache, something straight out of the 1920s if I had to guess. At first I thought it had to be my dad. He's mustachioed too. And that was the only logical explanation my brain could come up with. But as I rounded the corner, there he was, still 15 feet up on the scissor lift, working away. Not scary at all, just incredibly fascinating. My grandma used to hear kids running around in her apartment long after all of her grandkids were grown. The strangest part, the meat shop below her apartment has reported hearing it too. My cousin, he was 15 at the time, had an experience of his own not long after his grandpa passed away. He and a friend were upstairs playing video games when they both noticed a shadow behind them. It had the shape and posture of his grandpa just standing there. Both boys screamed, and in an instant the shadow vanished. They bolted downstairs to tell his mom, who at first didn't believe them because my cousin is known for telling tall tales. But then he burst into tears. He's not a crier, and especially not in front of friends, and sobbed, "I think it was Grandpa." That was the moment my aunt believed him. The next day, she went upstairs and, much like my mom had done in my own house, politely but firmly asked whatever was there to leave. And as far as I know, they haven't had an experience since. The last time I went ghost hunting, I had one of the most up-close encounters I've ever had. We were taking a ghost tour of the old Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. I was heading up a staircase right behind the tour guide, the only person in front of me, when it happened. As I reached the top of the steps, a voice whispered directly into my ear, "Hey, he's bringing a lot of people up here." It sounded like it was just inches away. Once again, I wasn't scared, just completely fascinated. I live for this kind of thing. That's pretty much all I've got for now. In less than a week, I'll be heading out for a full week of investigations around Kentucky, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Here I come. I know a lot of people don't believe in this stuff, but then again, a lot of people also don't believe the Earth is round. All I know is this: consciousness is energy, and according to science, energy cannot be created or destroyed. We don't really know what happens when you die, but from my life experiences, I'm convinced that we have souls. Some hang around for a while after the body passes, others move on to whatever's next. Story 4. I was actually attacked. I had been hearing strange noises for weeks before anything happened. Then one night, after my baby was born, I stayed up late in the living room. I was watching TV when I noticed a shadow move across the room. Suddenly the air felt icy cold, like someone had just walked between me and the coffee table. I froze, staring. My mind was trying to process what I'd seen when, out of nowhere, I felt a sharp pain at the top of my head. In one violent second, something yanked my hair fast and hard. I reached up instinctively and felt my hair lifted straight up, as if invisible fingers were still holding it. My heart was hammering. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow again. It moved toward the door and vanished into the floor like it was diving into a pool. I live in the top part of a 2-story house, but whatever this was, it didn't care about floors. And then, as clear as a thought but not my own, I heard a voice in my head, "Go check on the baby." I didn't hesitate. I got up and went straight to my room to check on my son. He was sleeping. I was shocked, and then fearful, though strangely, I felt more curiosity than fear. I wanted to know what it was, but all I saw was a shadow, the silhouette of a man. The next day, my scalp was sore and my hair was loose where it ached. I am from Mexico, where Cubans brought their religion, Santeria. Santeria was a cover religion that black slaves created to preserve the worship of voodoo. The black idols were replaced with statues of saints, so that the Catholic Spaniards would allow them to continue their religion and rituals. Everything began when I met a person who practiced Santeria rituals. She was my romantic partner for a short time. I never saw her rituals or her saints directly. Half of her house was dark, and one room was specifically for her rituals. She told me she had an altar there and performed her rituals inside, warning me never to enter that room. I never did, but every time I stayed alone in her house, I heard noises coming from that room. When I told her, she said not to worry about it. In Mexico, she told me there is real Satanism, and the rest are just charlatans. Our relationship ended badly, and I think she did something to me. After the breakup, strange things began happening in my house. The first was knocking on my walls at night. I thought it was the neighbor, so one day, just for fun, I knocked back. Then came knocking on my door. I assumed it was my next-door neighbor playing a prank because whenever I opened the door, no one was there. My microwave even started working on its own. I have to confess something that sounds crazy. I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt as though someone was there with me, and it brought me comfort. Why? Because I was far from home. My family was in another state, and I felt lonely. I didn't have any friends. So when that presence, spirit, or whatever it was seemed to be there, I didn't feel lonely anymore. I don't know why I felt that way. Maybe I thought it was my dead father. But then things began to change. One night, I woke up to the feeling of something sniffing me, like a dog sniffing my face. I was terrified because I didn't have any dogs or cats. Another day, I felt someone holding my face, their long nails pressing against my skin. I thought someone had broken into my house and was going to harm me, so I kept my eyes shut. Then the entire bed suddenly dropped to the floor as if 4 people had lifted it and let it fall. My boyfriend was having nightmares too. He said the devil spoke to him. Whenever he stayed at my house, he told me he had nightmares. After we broke up and I moved to another place, things only got worse. My cats would suddenly leap into the air in fear, crying and growling as if they saw something. One of them died, and I still don't know how. A shadow appeared on one of my walls, taking the shape of a tall man with horns. My next-door neighbor ended his own life, but something happened the night he hung himself that I won't mention here. Then one night, a stranger broke into my apartment. He was holding a screwdriver. I was in shock and didn't scream. He started walking toward me, but then his eyes shifted. He saw something behind me. I don't know what it was, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Suddenly, he turned around and left. He told me someone had broken into his place and that he was looking for that person. I thought, what on earth? I didn't call the police, I just let it go. Weeks later, I moved to California with my future husband. I was living with him when the noises began again. This time in his home, they sounded like someone dropping dishes on the floor and laughing in my room. I don't know if I was the only one hearing them because my husband never woke up, only I did. I don't have any mental disorders or disabilities, but I was truly scared, especially by the laughing and the sudden bad smells that would come and go. Sometimes it smelled rotten, then immediately like flowers. It was strange. One day, a powerful gust of air hit the windows. Not just mine, but the neighbors too. My neighbor was outside when it happened, and it struck the glass like a huge bird crashing into it. I was terrified. My neighbor simply asked if I had heard it. I was pregnant and physically exhausted, but I had begun to grow used to the noises. One night, I was so tired of them that my fear disappeared. I got up and walked to the kitchen. No dishes, no laughing, nothing. Everything stopped until my son was born. Then that shadow attacked me, and I saw it with my own eyes. I believe there is another realm beside ours. We moved into a house, and once again strange things began happening. This time, my husband saw things too and smelled the same rotten and then fragrant flower scents. The TVs would turn off and on, and the refrigerator door would open and close by itself. While I was working on the computer, someone suddenly shook my chair, as if they had grabbed it from behind. I have horrible nightmares almost every night. I don't know what to believe anymore. At times, I felt like I was going crazy, but my husband assured me he could also hear the noises. They happened not only at night, but during the day as well. I was exhausted. It felt like mental torture. I am a Christian, but I had a bad experience with my church and pastor. Before I met the woman who practiced Santeria, I had already stopped going to church and had even stopped praying to God. I looked on the internet and found a website where someone wrote that demons or spirits feed on energy, so I began ignoring the activity and controlling my fear, focusing on something else instead. I also started talking to God more and praying before I went to sleep. The noises decreased, but on 2 occasions I saw myself walking into my house. Then, while lying in bed, I could feel something beside me, as if it were lying next to me. Sometimes when I take naps in the afternoon, I wake up feeling as though someone has crawled into bed and lain down with me. Sometimes the bed was kicked while I was sleeping. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard a noise. I turned around and saw myself passing by my door, heading toward my son's room with folded clothes in my hands. I was scared, but in my mind I prayed, asking Jesus for protection. I got up 3 minutes later, but there was nothing. I was alone at home. Another day, I was on my computer while my cat was grooming herself on the couch. I glanced at her, then turned my head. Something caught my eye, a copy of my cat lying at my feet like a loaf of bread. I looked back at the couch and saw my real cat still there. When I turned to look under my feet, the copy of my cat had vanished. I've been communicating with God more often, but I can still feel that presence sometimes. The most recent event happened this year. He threw some DVDs at me while I was working. Other things have happened too, but they're almost too unbelievable to share. The Bible says that our struggles are not against flesh and blood, and I believe it. There are things in this world that prey on us. Story 5. I did not believe in ghosts before this experience, and I still do not now. However, it was an incredibly bizarre event that I have never been able to explain, and I can see how others might view it as something paranormal. Even now, I cannot find a reasonable explanation. About 15 years ago, I went to the movies with my girlfriend at the time. It was nothing unusual, just a simple night at the theater, followed by dropping her off at home and then returning to my apartment. For context, I lived in what could be described as a pool house. To reach the main road, I had to cross the yard of the property and pass through a wooden gate. Like any 20-year-old at the time, I spent the rest of the night talking to my girlfriend on the phone. This is where the night suddenly turned strange. Not long into our conversation, something happened. I should add that the topic of our call was how I felt inexplicably uneasy. It was strikingly odd, as this was an otherwise routine night and I had nothing stressful ahead. At one point, I remember saying, "I don't know, hun, something just feels off, like I'm walking into the boss's office about to be reprimanded, or sitting in the doctor's office waiting for bad news." This is when we reached the first unexplained but seemingly explainable event. Suddenly, her voice vanished mid-sentence. She had been talking about how she related to that feeling when applying to a new university. I said her name a few times and checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. Normal behavior. Then, as clearly as if it were yesterday, I said, "I know I shouldn't be scared or freaked out, but I am." And that's when I heard a voice, not hers, say, "I think you should be." I jumped back on my couch, completely freaked out. Why? Especially in the early 2000s, a crossed cell signal wasn't outside the realm of possibility. But what terrified me was that it was my voice, clear as day. There was no doubt about it. Yes, the mind plays tricks, and that's the explanation I lean toward. Perhaps it was a man whose voice sounded close enough to mine that in the moment my imagination took over. I threw the phone to the ground, and even then I could still hear the voice. My voice yelling, "Run! Run now, run!" At that moment, logic went out the window. None of this made any sense. I was already feeling uneasy, and my perception at the time was that I was literally yelling at myself through the phone to run. Leaving my phone on the ground, I bolted to the front door, snatched my keys off the counter, and sprinted across the yard, intending to get into my car. My only thought was to get out and go to my girlfriend's house. I reached the large wooden gate that separated the yard from the street. This was when the second strange thing of the night happened. It wouldn't open. The gate wasn't strong, just a roughly assembled wooden fence made of thin planks and a few nails. It opened easily by lifting a small hook and pushing, but this time, it was stuck fast. But on this night, it was not that simple. I lifted the hook, clearly unlatched from the small arm that held it in place, and pushed with the force and urgency of a hunter unleashed on its prey. Yet the gate would not budge. At that age, I was a relatively well-built man, more than capable of moving a fair amount of weight. But that night, I could not push this flimsy gate open. Stranger still, it felt as though someone was pushing back from the other side. Now, before you assume my imagination was running wild, let me explain. There is a distinct difference between pushing something heavy, pushing something obstructed, and pushing against someone actively resisting. You can feel that give and take between two opposing forces. If you've ever tried to open a door someone was holding shut, you know exactly what I mean. That was exactly the sensation I felt while struggling with the gate. I managed to push it just enough to leave it slightly ajar, but I couldn't overcome the resistance. And before you think there might have been someone on the other side holding it shut, let me be clear. The gaps between the planks made it easy to see through. There was nothing there. I didn't push for long, maybe 20 seconds at most. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the resistance vanished. I nearly stumbled forward face first, still pushing with the kind of desperation that only pure adrenaline brings. I reached my car, only a few meters away, when the third strange thing of the night happened. My car key was gone from my keyring. Again, this is something that can be explained. Keys fall off rings all the time, but this was one of those thick plastic car key fobs. Hard to imagine it just sliding off unnoticed. By now, I was drenched in sweat, scanning the street in panic, hoping to catch sight of whoever might be messing with me. I patted my pockets, thinking maybe it had fallen off during the struggle with the gate. Nothing. I went back inside my apartment, checking the counter where I had first grabbed my keys. Nothing there either. They had to be somewhere, right? After all, I had driven home. I looked around the apartment, jaw hanging open. My phone was still on the floor where I had thrown it, but I refused to give it more than a passing glance. Convinced I must have dropped my car key somewhere in the panic, I went back through the yard to search. No luck. I returned to the apartment and forced myself to pick up the phone, thinking that hearing my girlfriend's voice mattered more than finding my key at that moment. But the phone was off and it wouldn't turn back on. This, of all the strange things that night, was probably the easiest to explain. I had thrown it on the floor in a moment of panic, and we had been on a long call. It could have run out of battery or broken on impact. Still, I needed to talk to her, so I sat at my desk to check AIM, because that's what the cool kids did back then. And that's when I found it. Lying perfectly along the home row of my keyboard was my car key. At this point, I was in such a state of mental distress that I didn't stop to question anything. I grabbed the key, got into my car, and drove straight to her house. She was sitting on the porch waiting for me, assuming that when our conversation had cut out, I'd probably head over. All of these things are, in isolation, explainable. Keys fall off rings, gates get stuck, phones lose signal or die. But having so many strange events unfold in such a short span of time, ending with my car key lying perfectly on a keyboard I hadn't even gone near that night, left me shaken. It still does when I think about it. I did not, nor do I now, believe in the supernatural, but explaining that night, that will forever elude me. Story 6. As a parent to a psychic child, I could tell you so much about what I've learned and how it's changed me as a person. During that time, I was also in a relationship with a psychic medium who was still in the psychic closet because of a long history of persecution from his family. I wanted to believe him but couldn't quite wrap my head around it, at least not until things started to click. I feel like that's worth mentioning because I've learned a lot from him and from my kid as well. There have been so many things my kid has said to me that only make sense once they're validated and confirmed by another psychic person with more life experience. Someone who can say, no, it's not in your head. I see it, hear it, and feel it too. That's typical for many psychic children, and there are plenty of examples of this in the show Psychic Kids. Having the right kind of mentorship is so important for a young person developing their psychic sensitivity and abilities. I've learned a lot from both my child and from others. It might take years to unpack the individual stories that led to the bigger picture, which goes far beyond simple ghost stories. Here are some of the key things I've learned. When a young child says they have memories of being someone else from the past and describes specific things, take notes, especially if they provide names, dates, or details. Give them the benefit of the doubt and do some research. This is why I now believe in reincarnation. You only live once no longer feels true to me. What I believe now is closer to, you will live as many times as you need to. The things we do remember come to us at the exact time we're meant to recall them. It's the soul, not the brain, that holds those memories. Energy can't be created or destroyed, and that's what your soul is. Until it rejoins the source, it exists as an individuated soul. Realizing that brought me a huge sense of relief. Hauntings don't happen only because someone has died. Places and objects can become imbued with the energy of the environment around them. It's a bit like gravitational waves, but on a subtle level. Every thought you think, every feeling you feel, and every action you take leaves an imprint, not just on you, but on everything around you, even if it isn't immediately visible. If you spend a lot of time in a place and go through the absolute worst period of your life there, the strength of your emotions and thoughts can stick to the walls. That energy won't leave until something stronger overpowers it, whether it's high-frequency light or sound waves, an exorcism, a blessing, a banishing, or similar practices. Crystals can be useful for absorbing that energy, but if they take on too much, they can crack or break. Some crystals act like batteries, while others are great for conducting energy. That's why my kid uses a crystal grid around her bed. It's like building a cocoon. A grid can either draw energy in, pull energy out, or create a barrier. My kid uses it as a barrier because she's had unpleasant experiences with her feet being touched or pulled by opportunistic ghosts trying to wake her up to talk. It's never anything important to her, it's always what's important to them. Like, this is my apartment, I paid rent. Ghosts like that need to get the F out and let her sleep. Psychic phenomena are closely tied to electromagnetic sensitivity. This is how psychics, like my kid, can tune in to information like turning a radio dial. This tuning happens most easily through focus and intention, and it's supported by practices like meditation. Ever notice how all the spooky stuff seems to happen at night when everything is quiet and most people are asleep? That's because in the dark, there's much less electromagnetic interference. There's also less light and sound energy interfering with the far subtler light and sound waves that a ghost might produce. You've probably heard stories about ghosts making lights flicker. Think of it in terms of electromagnetic interference. That's one of the simplest ways for them to interact with the environment. When you visit a place you've never been before, pay close attention to how it makes you feel. If you feel apprehensive, it can help to say a prayer or meditate, whatever aligns with your belief system. Wherever you go, remember that you are a living being with dominion over yourself, and to some extent, your environment. Not only can you exert control over yourself and your surroundings, but you also have a responsibility to care for them. If something doesn't feel right, do your best to improve it. This doesn't mean you need to be perfect or get it right on the first try. It's about learning to get it right over countless attempts, most of which we may never even consciously remember. Ghosts are people, just like you and me. I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating for context. They often have unfinished business, and they don't sleep. When we die, we have a choice. We can move toward the light, or we can stay behind, weighed down by the things that burdened us in life. We still have the free will to make that choice. Unfortunately, staying behind often means being dragged through time by the unresolved attachments we haven't let go of. A great example of this is the movie A Ghost Story, which illustrates just how long someone can cling to their past and the vast stretches of time that can pass while they remain trapped in a life that has long since ended. I wish everyone could lose their fear of death, because it is not the end of us. If more people could truly see and understand how magnificent and beautiful their souls are, life would feel so different. We work so hard to ease our suffering, to make things better, and along the way we make mistakes. We blame ourselves as if it's the first time, as if we haven't already done it 1,000 times before. Life is like being given a beautiful new outfit at the start of the day. You're meant to wear it, get it dirty and stained with strawberry juice, and make the most of every moment. At the end of the day, the dress gets destroyed anyway, and you receive another brand new and different one the next day. We start life as innocent beings, then begin again as innocent beings, and so on. It is far more beneficial to be born with amnesia of our past lives than to remember every wrong we've ever done. A clean slate allows us to grow and experience life fully. When someone is dying, a psychic may be able to sense whether they are holding tightly to life. If they are unwilling to let go, it feels as though the air in the room grows heavy and dark with their fear and dread. When they are ready to move on, everything lightens and their suffering eases. Ghosts can't read your thoughts, but they can see and hear you. It's not like the others, where they can somehow avoid all signs of the living. The frequency of the living is simply much stronger than theirs. You can absolutely speak to ghosts out loud. They can hear you, even if you can't hear them. I strongly advise against using an Ouija board to communicate with them. Never invite a spirit to interact with your body as a means of communication. You don't truly know who or what they are, or what their intentions might be. When this has happened to me in the past, I've said something like, "I know you're here, but I can't see or hear you. If you need my help with something, turn the hallway light on and off where I can see it, and I'll find someone to help." Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.